I am now being joined by the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Ambassador Herman Cohen, to discuss more on the late Chadian leader and his upcoming funeral. Good to have you join us, Ambassador Cohen.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
For the former leader, Idriss Deby, came into power just at a time where you were the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. He took power in 1990. What was your relationship like with him, and how would you describe him in the very first term of his office?
Well, when I first met him, he was Chief of Staff of the Army. The head of state was Hissène Habré in 1990. And at that time, the Libyan army under Muammar Gaddafi had occupied a large portion of northern Chad. It was called the Aouzou Strip, and it had an important airfield. And Muammar Gaddafi wanted to use that airfield for his operations in East Africa. So, of course, the United States and France did not approve of that. So I went to see Idriss Deby, Chief of Staff, and I said, how can we help you? And he described to me the equipment that he needed, and he felt confident that he could drive the Libyans out. So I arranged for him to get especially the vehicles and the arms that he needed. And it was very, very easy for the Chadian army to drive the Libyans out. The Libyan troops were not very well motivated, so he was able to recuperate the lost territory. At the same time, the French found that Hissène Habré was being very nasty to French people living in Chad. He had kidnapped a French woman, and when the French sent a military representative to talk to Hissène Habré, he had him murdered. So things were very bad between Hissène Habré and France and the United States. So the French arranged for Idriss Deby to go to Sudan and organize a military force, and he invaded Chad and easily overthrew Hissène Habré, and that's how he became president of Chad. And since then, since 1990, his relations with both France and the United States were very good. And of course, an American company, Exxon, a big oil company, discovered oil in southwest Chad, and that gave Idriss Deby an important source of revenue. And after the Islamic jihadists started to be active in the Sahel, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and Niger, it was his army that was very active with the French in keeping the Islamist terrorists in the Sahel from expanding and from being successful. So Idriss Deby has been very important to both the United States and France over the years.
It's interesting that you mentioned his role in ensuring the security of the Sahel, especially in countries like Nigeria, in countries like Mali, and even in the Central African Republic. He has now passed on, and many people say that this is a huge vacuum in terms of security in the Sahel. How do you see things playing out, especially now that it looks like the rebels have been emboldened by his death?
Yes, well, one thing I want to say about the rebels who have been fighting the Chadian army, they are not Islamic people. They are not terrorists. What they are fighting against, what they say, is corruption. You know, the oil that is coming, the money that's coming from the oil in southwestern Chad, they claim that none of it has been used for the benefit of the Chadian people. So actually, I've spoken to some people from this organization called FACT, who came in from Libya, and they tell me that what they're fighting against is the fact that none of the oil money has been used for the benefit of the Chadian people. So it's no longer an ideological issue, it's an internal fight over resources within Chad, and I kind of sympathize with these people in FACT.
I want to get to the internal squabble in a minute, but I just want to stay now on the security in the Sahel. And the U.S. has released a statement on the appointment of his son as the interim leader of Chad. The U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price said the U.S. wants to see a transition consistent with its constitution. The U.S. is a very strong ally of Chad, especially of Idriss Deby, in terms of dealing with insecurity in that region. So where does this leave the U.S.?
Well, the U.S. is kind of worried that the transition after the death of Idriss Deby was unconstitutional. The Constitution says that in the event of the death of the Chief of State, the head of the National Assembly becomes the interim Chief of State pending an election. Well, the Army didn't do that. The Army just abolished the Constitution, and this is very dangerous. This is very unfortunate, and it helps the rebels, the FACT, to continue the war. They're saying these people are not only corrupt, but they're unconstitutional. So I think it's important for the international community to persuade this new military junta that's over to sit around the table with the FACT and to develop a transition to democracy. They cannot wait 18 months. It has to be done immediately, otherwise there'll be significant problems internally in Chad.
But does that mean that the U.S. will have to find new allies? If it's saying that, look, we cannot relate with this team because it is unconstitutional, does it mean that the U.S. would have to find new allies within the sub-region?
I don't think so. I think the Chad Army is very good. We continue to assist it, and we work with the French. So I think what we have to do is persuade these Army people who have seized power to think again and to sit around the table with the FACT people, these rebels, and allow a transition of democracy. And I would also bring in the head of the National Assembly to return to constitutionality. This is possible, and I think we could persuade them to do that.
Chad's main opposition parties have also released a statement and referred to the appointment of his son as a nation's leader as an institutional coup. The rebels have also objected to the move, and they say it is not a monarchy, it is a democracy. You talked about the political stability in Chad earlier, and I wanted you to talk more about that in terms of this recent arrangement, and if you have any concerns of what could happen going forward.
Well, the rebels who have been fighting against Idriss Deby, they're not going to stop fighting. They're going to say, well, this is unconstitutional. Just because the son of Idriss Deby is now in charge doesn't mean everything is okay. So they're going to keep pressing and keep fighting. And they were superior for a while to the Chad Army. So I think the military who feel that they are now in power will not be able to succeed. They have to get into a negotiation, or there's a strong chance they'll be defeated militarily. You know, these fighters from Libya, they are people who were brought into Libya as mercenaries. They're well-trained, they're well-armed, and they're connected to this gentleman named Haftar inside Libya. So they could, in my view, they could defeat the Chadian army. So there must be a dialogue started, and I think the U.S. and the French are now putting heavy pressure on on Idriss Deby's son to get out of this unconstitutional system and start a dialogue. Otherwise, the war will continue.
All right. It's always good to speak with you, Ambassador Cohen, the former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. Thanks for always sharing your thoughts with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.